break them up, rein them in, right? Talking about antitrust or competition law is often a way that we're talking about these massive issues writ large, right? Do we need new, special, fancy policy, or can we do a better job with the tools that we have? Both of you have worked and do work on the front lines of digital market power. Marcus from an enforcer seat, but you have tons of business experience as well, and Luther from the perspective of challengers. When we talk about trying to rein in tech monopolies or the largest technology companies, what does it actually mean? What are we trying to accomplish? How are we going to know we're succeeding? Do you want to kick off?
Sure. Thank you very much. By the way, I'm delighted to be here. And let me make very clear that any views I express are very much my own, not necessarily the CMA's or the British government's, at least not anymore. So what is the goal? I'd say, first of all, the concept of reining in monopolies, it sounds very negative, it sounds very restrictive. I think the goal is actually a very expansive and positive one at two levels. One, it's around ensuring vibrant economic growth that delivers prosperity for all, and the second is around democracy. So let me talk about each in turn. It is in the interest of every nation, every country, to drive economic growth. The good news is that over the last 100 years, there's been lots of ways of trying to do that, and you kind of learn lessons, and there are some pretty good consensus about what are some of the critical conditions. So it's now well understood that to get economic growth, you need productivity growth, and for that, you need innovation and investment by businesses. That is all well understood. What is also well understood is that if you want innovation and investment by businesses that leads to productivity growth that then diffuses across the economy, you need three conditions. One, you need an environment where customers or consumers are free to make a bunch of choices because they have a fair amount of alternatives that they can switch between, because that's what gives the incentive for companies to innovate and to find better ways to serve those customers, to find better solutions to problems. Secondly, you need businesses, innovators, entrepreneurs, big, small, all to be free to compete and innovate if they have a fantastic idea or a fantastic new technology, or they have a better way of running a process, without being held back by restrictions, or being choked off by incumbents, or by monopolies, or by restrictive practices. Yeah, and thirdly, you need an environment where all these this dynamic competition between businesses, new and old, and customers making active choices leads to a diffusion of technology around the economy fast, because there is lots of ways in and lots of ways out. And so, in a way, how do you know you're succeeding? Well, if in the biggest markets of the economy that are either big markets in and of themselves or that have become pretty foundational to other markets, and so search and search advertising, mobile ecosystems in which whether you're a business or a consumer, you bring your content to others, and others can search for you. Cloud services, enterprise software, these are all really important foundational markets. And the question is, so are we getting more choice for customers over time, or are we getting less ability to choose and to switch and have an alternative? You know, are we forced down one path or not? Is it easier or is it harder now for businesses to come to market, to access the inputs they need, or to access the customers they need without being gated or choked off or restricted or taxed in some private company way? You know, is it easier now for new technologies, just like in the past, to disrupt the status quo? Or is now any new innovation immediately absorbed by the incumbents who want to protect the status quo? You know, it's quite interesting, the whole AI debate, it's the first time in economic history that a new disruptive technology has not been used to disrupt the existing incumbents. It's the first time when that technology is immediately absorbed, directly and indirectly, by the incumbents, who are in fact using it to entrench their market power. So on the economy front, I think there's some clear success factors that you can look at and failure points. Mm-hmm. Very quickly on the democracy side.
Sure, and then I got to get Luther
I just want, you know, and it's almost unusual to have to say this, right? But the goal on that side is to have a situation where in any given country, the rules and regulations and laws of that country are decided by governments that are elected by the people of that country. In other words, that they're not set by non-accountable, independent firms with such market power that countries have become dependent on them, and so dependent that they start to influence exemptions from laws, exemption from copyright, exemption from competition law, exemption from taxes, exemption from safety, exemption from whatever rules govern broadcast media. So again, you can see whether or not it's getting better or worse.
Absolutely. Taking on incumbents, recognizing their power. What's going on?
Sure, yeah. I mean, I just want to take a quick step back and level set. So Y Combinator is sort of the original accelerator. It was founded 20 years ago, and we have seeded now over 5,000 startups. We have over 11,000 founders in our network. And I met Gary Tan, the CEO and president of YC, in 2022 when we were sitting around the table. It was at the White House, and Tim Wu was at the head of the table, and we were at the time lobbying for, I was at Yelp at the time, and we were lobbying for, together, the American Innovation and Choice Online Act, which, you know, some people have compared to sort of like a DMA-like law that we were trying to get through Congress 2 Congresses back. And Gary said something that I'll never forget, and I think really birthed a meme that I think is a very powerful one that people should take with them in thinking about these issues. He said, you know, you go to Brussels, you go to Washington, and big tech has a, you know, always has a seat at the table. But little tech, you know, you never see those guys in the room. And that was the first time I'd ever heard the phrase little tech. And I think that term has really gotten a lot of traction. People have sort of taken it and run with it. And so my role at YC, I've been in it now 2 years, is really to lobby for little tech. And so in terms of reining in big tech, you know, it will endorse everything that was just said. I think you can't create economic prosperity unless you have a vibrant little tech. You can't have a vibrant little tech unless you're passing laws and undertaking enforcement actions which end self-preferencing, which promote interoperability. So I'll just pause there so we can get to some more questions. But I think that is a those pieces are very key, and the place of little tech in that dynamic is really important.
I'll stick with you for this next one because you mentioned self-preferencing and interoperability. What's kind of next on the horizon? We've seen leadership changes when it comes to antitrust in the UK and in the US, so maybe there are some interesting opportunities for Canada too, but where do you see those promising policy areas that might be complementary to kind of core antitrust laws or part of them?
Yeah, I mean, it's somewhat depressing right now in the wake of the Judge Mehta kind of flip-flop on Google. Still optimistic about the ad tech case. I think, you know, if there's a message to any Canadian sort of regulators or those that influence them in the room, I think it's you know, both the U.S. and Canada have to kind of get our acts together in terms of renewing the effort to pass DMA ex ante kind of legislation that would nip this sort of in the bud at the beginning, and it needs to include stronger, some more muscle around executive liability. I think that would be sort of my prescription on that. And then I think also for you know, I already made the point about kind of growth is coming from little tech. You know, I think actually there is some glimmers of optimism within the Trump administration. They've very much seized upon kind of like, you know, ensuring that like the AI space, the kind of LLM foundational model space is very competitive. And then some may have paid attention. There was a Trump ally in like late July, early August, while there was all this coverage of the admin, specifically Lutnick and Jameson Greer, sort of putting pressure on the European Commission to sort of neuter the DMA enforcement over the trade disputes. There was a DMA complaint from a Trump ally about how Instagram was violating 6.5 of the DMA and self-preferencing threads, which was a threat to the microblogging ecosystem, including Mastodon, X, Blue Sky, and Getter, and the best one of all, Truth Social. So think about that. I mean, that's actually like I think a clever strategy. You sort of have to play. Obviously Trump is sort of a wild card, and so you have to sort of play on that sort of bizarro land level where you go into the trade negotiation and say, look, we're happy to not enforce our local laws, but by the way, we were about to totally hook up Blue Sky with some free interoperability and Instagram and not Blue Sky, but True Social. So I think that there's like clever ways that you can actually remind the admin, and I think that as long as national laws are focused on interoperability and anti-self-preferencing, you see that these things don't come up as much as, say, sort of the digital services tax, which they lean really hard on. So I think that there are some opportunities to navigate in this admin as confusing as it is.
Digital services and trade negotiations certainly very alive to Canadians. Where else should we be looking? What's the future of regulation here?
So I think the question being, how do we address the root cause of all of this, which is market power and dependency on a few firms for provision of essential services? I mean, that's what the problem. So there's 4 ways that you can deal with this. They're sort of complementary. So one is you need to make sure that market power and dependency doesn't get worse, and that's the role of merger control. And that's why not so long ago, competition authorities around the world started looking at the actions by some of the big tech incumbents to either buy or take majority stakes in, but take effective control, whether it's through people or arrangements or contracts, of the next wave of innovators who were at that time independent, smaller AI firms. Because obviously if a game-changing technology that can have a major impact on how things get done is an alternative to the current offer, then that creates more competition. If it is part of the current offer, it creates more dependency. Unfortunately, I think that tool is in the back burner for now. We know because the 2 jurisdictions, the US and the UK, where it was most likely to proceed with any fortitude, back down because of big tech pressure on the politicians, and certainly in our case, not necessarily in the US case. The second thing you can do about it is, well, you can break them up. But practically, the only nation that can do that, the only authority that can do that, are the courts in the US. And the law is there to enable you to do that. Once something is branded a monopoly, the law says that that monopoly must be stopped, and the fruits of the monopoly needs to be stopped, and it must not continue. Google has been in search found to be a monopoly, but as you say, the usual remedy hasn't followed, and we'll see what happens for the next one. The third thing you can do is to say, okay, so practically, politically, it's not going to happen that we break them up. We can't stop them getting stronger. So what is happening is effectively the creation of a set of national utilities, because these are national essential infrastructure that are individually, in terms of the different verticals, effectively 1 or 2 monopolies. And so what we've done in the past with other such monopolies that are essential is you start to regulate them. You can't have competition to ensure serving customers well or improving quality and improving innovation and good value. So you use regulation to replicate that. The UK, as it happened, had a really, really good regime put in place called the Digital Markets Competition Regime under the DMCC Act that became law on the 1st of January, which was on the positive end of, when you think of regulation, you can have good regulation, bad regulation. You can have regulation focused on outcomes, or regulation that's very prescriptive and says you must do this or you can't do that. The UK Digital Markets one was about outcomes. It can be bespoke, saying I recognize that search is different to advertising, is different to enterprise software, is different to cloud servers, or you can say they're all the same, and the UK was very bespoke. And you can say, look, it's time-bound. We recognize new technology might change the game, and so if you regulate someone, it should only be for 5 years because the new technology might create. Or you can say it's not time-bound. And again, the UK was had a fantastic law in place. Unfortunately, the moment it was about to be implemented, things changed, and so that's not happening. And that leaves you, therefore, with the fourth solution, which is in fact the best solution, and the one that our previous speaker very, very eloquently spoke about, which is if you have a set of firms on whom you are dependent and who have massive market power to the extent that nations can't do anything about it, other than the US, you create alternatives, right? Creating an alternative takes a long time. You can't have government create the alternative because they don't, that would be a bad idea. But through investment policies, through regulation, through requirements of having multiple suppliers when you're doing government procurement, you can together set up the conditions for alternatives to rise.
So you're saying Canada shouldn't create those, jurisdictions can't create those alternatives, but they can support them. We have that conversation very much happening in Canada. Governments are starting to get back in the business of picking winners, right? Which we did sort of move away from, at least here, right? In chips, in AI, definitely in the US, and cloud. How should we, or can we, reconcile that industrial push with the need for open, contestable markets? Where do you see the line or the opportunity between strategic autonomy and potentially entrenching new monopolies?
It's tricky with AI because AI is actually this pretty big bucket of industries, and so when I think about AI, I'm mainly talking about not sort of the chips and the hardware, but really the foundation layer. And I think that layer is actually the most exciting thing happening right now. And I'm probably more techno optimistic than this crowd. I feel like there's a lot of concern, and some of it is justified about sort of the models and how fast these companies are growing. But the good news is it's actually still pretty pluralistic. The market has not tipped. They are duking it out every week. It feels like there's a new model that is launching. There's all this pressure from open source in China, and so we'll see where things kind of land in the next couple years, and certainly we should be really vigilant. But I think that so far the way that the sort of industrial policy has been designed is creating, I think, a positive outcome in the U.S. sort of foundation lab competition world, because basically that space looks like what the rest of the internet should look like. We should have lots of competition in search and smartphones and app stores, but currently the only place where there's competition is basically me with 4 tabs, Grok, Claude, OpenAI, Gemini, and Llama, and DeepSeek. So and it's really, that's really exciting. Probably most consumers don't behave like that, but I think that for developers, it's really cool, because if you feel like the price of something is too high, or the model's not really working for you, it's really easy to switch in a new one. And so that's what's kind of keeping these forces at play. So not super strong criticism right now of that, of sort of the industrial policy with respect to AI in the U.S.
Probably because it's the US. Do you have
So
reactions?
I think, and this idea of creating, it's like the idea of creating national champions or picking winners. It is a very hard one for governments. There's 2 points I'd make. One is that, again, the evidence shows that when a country tries to pick an individual winner from the get-go, it always fails. It's interesting, the economies that have become globally match fit, because the idea should be to make a globally match fit set of companies rather than domestic champions. Where that's really worked well, the examples are all over the place. After the war, Japan, Germany, they developed a real global lead in a set of sectors precisely because they refused to create one behemoth company to drive that development, but force competition domestically. The US, Silicon Valley, that's precisely the result of having lots of competition nurtured and allowed, rather than having AT&T and the Bell Labs drive all of that. And China, EV cars and batteries, have a fantastic lead in technology now globally. And one of the reasons that's often not talked about is that they created hyper competition for years between alternative suppliers, and every time the best lot got weeded out and given a bit more money, and so on, until you've got global winners. So it's clearly not the solution that brings the best outcomes. However, there's a second objective of government, which is to assure secure supply of essential services to your nation. And some of these digital services are now essential, right? They're nationally essential. And security of supply means supply that is not beholden to influence by foreign actors or foreign governments with whom you do not share either values or the same agenda. Which is why for a long time, China, Russia was restricted in certain industries. And now, in countries outside the US, countries are beginning to think, well, maybe the US falls into some of that because they can't be relied upon not to use it as leverage. And so there is a lot to be said for creating, again, the conditions for an alternative set of options to emerge. I mean, imagine, one analogy is, imagine if the world we were in today, the only option of aeroplane was a Boeing. We have Airbus and Boeing, and so we have competition, and therefore we have a choice, and therefore that make both. Well, it's better than one. That's all I can say. It's better than one, right? The 3 and 4 would be better, but I don't think you can set absolute rules. So the key is to remove dependency, and for that you do need to create alternatives, and that starts maybe with developing a domestic set of alternatives. I would say there's a lot to be said for cooperation and coordination across like-minded nations. I mean, I remember when I was in the G7 meetings, Canada, Australia, France, Germany, the EU, Korea, Japan, they were all in the same boat on this. Mm-hmm. But somehow it has become fragmented.
You and I were chatting about voice assistants. Do you want to pick up on that a little bit?
Yeah. I think so. What Frank McCourt was saying earlier about sort of like, it's just technology. You can sort of imagine. I mean, it's sort of jumping up on some of that is like we could have so many nice things basically, and you saw this dinner with Trump and all these tech CEOs a few weeks back, and I think I saw some tweet that basically had it was clocking that Tim Cook had thanked Trump like a dozen times in 90 seconds or something. And I think the reason that, you see Tim Cook groveling and sucking up so much is they really, really need people like Howard Lutnick to lean on Europe and lean on other nations to not enforce their competition laws, because they're the jig is up over at Apple. Like Cupertino, California has kind of woken up. John Gruber, the kind of famous Apple blogger, wrote a really long post about this. People have completely lost faith in Apple's ability to innovate, and it's obviously it's got all the telltale signs. It's spending more on buybacks and R&D and all this by a huge multiple. But the most innovative thing they've shipped is as recently as the Vision Pro, which they promptly shelved. News reports are that their voice assistant has been kicked to 2027. Siri/Apple Intelligence is embarrassingly stupid. So if Apple is compelled to be interoperable, i.e., if I am a third-party developer, like a little tech company that's got a clever kind of approach to sort of voice assistance, maybe built on one of the aforementioned models, and I have deeper iOS access to some of those commands and APIs because the DMA has successfully compelled Apple to provide them. The iPhone becomes kind of a commoditized device, and you get just a lot of exciting things unlocked. We have a company called Blue, which was in our last batch, and they have an incredible demo. I forget. I should know this. If you do a search for Blue and Y Combinator, you can pull up their website. But basically, there's a demo on their website that it's a 2-minute video of this guy driving from Silicon Valley to San Francisco, and in his car, he's dictating to his iPhone, "Hey, can you grab these tasks out of Slack? Can you send Mary the document?" And he's just doing that all voice assistant, and you're sort of immediate impulse is like, how do I download this app? Until you realize blue requires like a USB-C dongle. So it sort of reminds me, I actually got on eBay a couple weeks ago, because when I'm talking about blue, I like to pull out this old acoustic coupler that Radio Shack used to sell. And it reminds me a little bit of the acoustic coupler from like the 70s, where like in order to interact with the Bell systems, you literally had to physically put these like rubber cups on your phone so they could talk to this system. And so there's no reason Blue shouldn't be an app and that's #1 in the top 10 apps, other than these just sort of arbitrary ways that Google and Apple self-deal. And so we have to stay on it. We have to stay aggressive, because when we do, it's going to unlock so much incredible innovation.
Let's stay on being persistent and aggressive. Let's round out with great ideas that other jurisdictions should copy, replicate, experiment with, coordinate. We know that Canada tends to be a wait-and-see country, but that doesn't always have to be the case. I'll let either of you kick off, but it's what we're going to dedicate the rest of our time to, so there can still be back and forth if you wish. Ready?
Yeah. I've spent some time in Ankara, and I think that so this is going in a fun direction. The company I used to work for had a complaint against Google there, and they actually have a really sophisticated competition team, but they kind of infamously have a law that, like, if you're sort of mean to the president on social media, you can actually, like, you're required to have a local representative that gets sort of locked up, and that's like the way that they kind of keep the social media companies from not letting bad political speech online. I don't think we should go that far in terms of our competition laws, but I do think that we should start to get a bit creative about like personal executive liability. There's a man named, I think, Alex Ramos, who's an Apple executive. He's like a VP of finance that in the Epic v. Apple case in Northern California, he was found sort of to be in criminal contempt, and like as soon as the judge sort of issued that kind of ruling and sort of put the spotlight on that guy, it led to Apple kind of finally loosening the screws a little bit. So I think insofar as we can like actually create some cost for misbehavior and not just like allow them to kick the can with malicious compliance, we should be focusing our efforts there.
What else?
I guess my one answer on this is this idea of encouraging alternatives through enforcing the laws we already have in a set of nations that I'll mention. But so interoperability, ease of access, etc. There's a lot that can be achieved if the next wave of innovators are allowed to just innovate, scale, and create an alternative. For that to happen, does require, and can't be done by individual nations on their own, because each of them gets picked off in the bigger negotiation of, well, that's attacking American companies, or it's restricting American companies, therefore your tariffs go up, or this or that, or military support will be withdrawn, etc. So, but it does work if you have the UK, Japan, Canada, Korea, India, Brazil, and several of the individual nations of the EU, not just the EU, saying, that kind of law that we have, interoperability, creating competition, that's a good thing. We'll just make sure it gets enforced now instead of backtracking individually. I can assure you, it is in the interests of those nations, in the interests of most of the leaders of those nations, as well as in the interests and in the appetite of the heads of most of the competition authorities of nations. So I still have some hope that the tables will eventually turn.
I like to end with a teeny tiny bit of optimism. Please join me in thanking Marcus and Luther for outlining an agenda path forward. Thank you.